Welcome to the Prime Property Finance Podcast with Gareth Morgan and Mark Watts. This unique podcast will dive deep into all areas of property investing finance, going behind the scenes with property professionals, investors and clients. Between us, we have 35 plus years experience in property finance. The podcast has been launched to share knowledge, mindset requirements and experiences of successful investors and professionals. We aim to simplify many of the complicated areas of finance and investing and provide valuable and easy to implement tips. Keep an eye out for our new longer episodes every Tuesday and our shorter ones every Friday.
Paul, lovely to have you on the show. Really excited to get into some detail around how serviced accommodation, and within that we talk about sort of Airbnb hosts per se, but serviced accommodation and holiday let owners can really manage, increase their fees by managing their properties better. And you've got some experience and possibly some tools that can help with that. So yeah, really excited to get into talking about that today. I've got some experience of this myself, so you really struck a chord with me when we started talking about it. So do you want to just give us a quick introduction about yourself and where you've come from and a little bit about what you're up to, and then we'll talk a bit more about the actual tool a little bit later on.
Yeah, love to. Thanks, Gareth. Really good to be here. Thanks for having us on. Yeah, really exciting development for us with HostAlert. My name is Paul O'Donoghue. I am one of the co-founders of a new business for SAs, or as I like to call them, short-term rental hosts, STRs, called HostAlert. And HostAlert is an industry first, really, which is quite strange for an industry that's been around for a while, where HostAlert's purpose is to give access to event data, structured, verified event data for short-term rental hosts in the area where their property is, so they can be ahead of the demand curve and adjust prices accordingly. And it's targeted really at the independent STR, so the guys that have one or two properties. They're the ones that are normally sort of overlooked by the sort of the larger platform players out there.
Yeah, and like I said to you just now, that is, I had properties in Swansea. I think one of my properties was the fourth or fifth property on Airbnb in Swansea. I think it was back in about 2016, something like that. So that was an interesting time. It was great to begin with because there was no competition, and Airbnb had just become this huge thing, and it was fantastic. And then all of a sudden, within probably 12 months, it was just flooded with properties. And it was a headache of mine then. And like I just said to you before, I can't believe that nobody's come up with this idea, because it's an idea that's been chomping at the bit. It was frustrating. Why can't we just have a single resource that can alert us when different events are on and different guests are on? Because whilst we, as an example, if you're into sport, then you'll know when the sport is on, but you may not have a clue when there's concerts on, and vice versa. So, and then outside of that, there's big events for different reasons, that, and different trade events and various things that might be going on. So, what led you to coming up with that, and what's your background? Before maybe we get into how you come up with the idea, what's your sort of background in business and within property?
Yeah, absolutely. And everything you said there absolutely strikes a chord with myself around sort of that lack of availability and visibility and servicing this particular problem within that market. So my background for the past 30 years, I've been working in digital marketing and the SaaS technology space, working with sort of major brands to help them to build visibility and specifically geo-targeted solutions based on customer sort of behavior and demand, working with quite large well-known companies like Cadbury's, Formula One, LVMH, Center Parcs, etc. And, from a property perspective, I've always been in and around property. We were talking earlier on that, the first experience was in the 90s. I was involved in launching the first national newspaper colour supplement for property, working with companies like Barratt Redrow, Taylor Wimpey, Persimmon Homes, as they were going through quite a resilient period of growth in the 90s in the residential market. And I still I have property. I've been buying and selling property over the years. We still have properties that we rent out. So very much involved in the industry and the market. And my partner in HostAlert, Andy, has been buying and selling, flipping properties for a number of years. And funnily enough, during that period of buying and selling properties, he got involved in the short-term rental business, or more commonly known sort of Airbnb hosting. And that led us to the journey of creating HostAlert.
Awesome. So you said Andy's got quite a bit of experience within the short-term rental market. And is this the sort of problem that he was having?
Yeah, we were working together on a couple of his projects, and we were having a discussion one day, and he was telling me about a really specific problem he had when Taylor Swift announced her tour, her Eras tour, specifically at Anfield, Liverpool FC's football ground. And he started to get bookings that were kind of 6 months in advance. And he didn't know why they were booking. And then he sort of started to find out that it was for Taylor Swift. And he had lost money. I think it was around about £1,500 he had lost because he hadn't reacted quick enough to the demand. And so people were, renting his Airbnb at a price that was way below what ended up being the actual market value. And the same thing happened with when the PGA announced that Royal Birkdale was going to be the venue for the next British Open. Again, the same thing happened. He was getting bookings 8 and 9 months in advance and didn't realize what it was. And the conclusion was, if it's happening to me, it's happening to other people as well. And so we started to talk to people and found out that it was a really common problem. When you're looking at some of the Airbnb forums or you go onto Reddit, there are 2 factors that come into play that affects both the hosts and the guests, because a lot of the times you've got Coachella going on at the moment, and we're seeing a lot of noise about hosts cancelling guest bookings because the host didn't know that Coachella was around the corner, and then contacting them and putting the prices up. So, it affects both sides of the marketplace, and is a very, very common problem.
Yes, naughty as well, isn't it? And I know the online aggregators are really not, they don't react well to that type of behavior, do they? But that still doesn't help the end user, does it? Because they've had they're expecting accommodation, it's lined up, they've got it at a good rate because they've been savvy enough to get onto it early. And then they are punished then at the last minute as well, isn't it? Which then they end up paying. Not only they pay over the odds than what they should have. So yeah, it's very naughty. There will be the odd instance where that is a genuine reason that's had to happen, but the majority of time it is just greed on behalf of the owners, isn't it? And it's not good practice. I was so very much, having been in this position, went through various thought processes. As a host, you want to have as your bookings available to be open for as long as possible, more than 12 months in advance, so that people who are, because if you're open more than 12 months in advance, there's opportunity to book that up, isn't there? In which case, if people want to book a year in advance for something that they've got on, or there's various events, and the more you can get booked up in it is great. However, from the other side of the coin is like, well, we only actually want to open up for the next 2 to 3 months because we've got a line of sight of what events are happening and what the demand is. Plus, we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot that if we're open now and things change, then we will miss out on some of those better bookings because we don't react quickly enough in order to put the price up when something's announced. So how does HostAlert navigate that challenge?
Yeah, and that's one of the key points that we focus on. So we're really looking to champion independent SA short-term rental property hosts. There are nearly 400,000 short-term property hosts in the UK. 90% of those are independent. So, the majority of the market has 1.2 properties typically. So these individuals are probably managing their SA alongside a full-time job, so they're time poor. They're currently missing out on this event-based sort of demand that's going on. you quite rightly said, Airbnb allows you to take bookings, within a 12-month window. And there isn't a single source of truth to find out what's coming down the line. We know, for example, this weekend we had the Grand National at Aintree. The dates for next year are already announced, and you will have 20% of the people that are going to be using short-term rental properties that will be booking immediately. And so you've got to be on it really from day one. And it's this thing called that early booking window. And we're hopefully going to be helping independent short-term rental hosts to really maximize that so they get that real good visibility. And there are three key things that happen that you touched on. One is maximizing revenue around events. You need to be able to see what's coming down the line, look where that demand is, so you can then make a decision on how much you're going to charge, or you can work with some pricing tools that you may or may not be using to set your price. Avoid underpricing on those already open dates. So making sure that you're getting alerted when things are announced. So if you are a subscriber to HostAlert, and there is a new concert, Coldplay announced a tour, the minute that Coldplay announced that tour, and Coldplay haven't announced the tour, but using it as an example, HostAlert subscribers would get a notification. So you are staying ahead of that game. If they are going to be appearing in the area where your property is. And then it's optimizing those minimum night stays around events. So things like, I use a Coldplay tour, if it takes place on a Saturday night and it's in a major city, people will be turning up on a Thursday or a Friday typically, and then going to the event on a Saturday, maybe even on a Sunday, or even staying for Sunday, making it a long weekend. So you're maximizing that kind of that event impact around your property. So you do have that view either 3 months ahead, or you can have it 12 months ahead. So if you subscribe to have 12 months ahead, you can start to filter through 7 different categories. And again, this is kind of where the problem lies. And I'll talk to people that are in the industry and they'll say, well, there are certain technologies and tools, and even built within Airbnb, the auto pricing, you can just leave it and, it's turned on and done. But that demand that they are working to the shifts in the demand. So they're not looking at the announcement of an event and then changing the price. They're waiting for the market to move. And then based on that market move, then the price will go up. But we're allowing people to get ahead of that curve so they can make their own decisions on where they price and how they price.
So on that basis, if they just stick to the Airbnb model, then it'll possibly be too late for them to capture that increased revenue, right?
Absolutely. And that's the key thing, it is the increased revenue. And we've done research looking at data from Airbnb, data from AirDNA, trusted sources like the ONS, Office of National Statistics. And independent hosts are typically losing between £3,000 and £9,000 a year in the UK. And then when you sort of look at the impact across the 300,000 independents, that's nearly 2 billion in lost revenue across that one segment just in the UK. And you look at the typical demands that come out. So we use Taylor Swift again. Taylor Swift was pushing up demand for short-term rental properties by 80 to 90% in London and about 90% in Liverpool. The Edinburgh Festival, short-term rental demand outstrips hotel demand whenever the Edinburgh Festival is on. So these events are really important. And the great benefit for hosts is customers, the guests, they book earlier, they stay for longer, and they cancel less. So not only are you getting a better guest, but you're getting guests that come earlier, stay longer, spend more, cause fewer cancellations. And the other thing that we've found out, which is really interesting, is giving people sight of what guests are going to be doing when they're staying in that property. And we have had examples. I mean, Andy had this example, my co-founder at HostAlert had this example where there was a rave event in Liverpool. And he had people in his number one rated Airbnb up until 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, disturbing the neighbors. And he said that if I'd have known that was the booking for that event, I would have probably switched off that weekend and sort of protected the property, protected the environment around the property as well. So there's lots of benefits, and there are a lot of key statistics and facts around the real benefit of being aware of what's coming down the line to make sure you are maximizing your revenue.
And that's a really interesting point as well. It's not just about maximizing revenue, is it? It's also about protecting your asset, which is your property. You know, if there's, like you said, if there's various things going on that, you know, raves and what have you, then you probably want to try and avoid that as well. So that's a very interesting point that I hadn't thought about. You know, I things that jump out at me, you know, so you have in South Wales, you have the annual Ironman event at Tenby, which is a huge event. It's considered one of the most challenging Ironman courses in world Ironman races. And every September in Tenby, it's a huge event, a huge following, which is a seaside resort. So there's a good amount of accommodation there already, but every year that weekend is always, you know, probably the busiest weekend of the year in Tenby. And that's in September. And so there's people that have caravans in the area. They'll rent out their caravans for that weekend to competitors and visitors, and, you know, because people are generally treating that as a once in a lifetime event that they are going to carry out. And then they've got all the, you know, they've been training for it for 2 years. All their family will come down and support them. And so it's a huge thing. So those are easy because they're in the calendar and everyone knows long way out what those are. But it's the ones, the concerts which are announced on a shorter term basis, or it could be an industry event or whatever it may be. Those are the ones that you need to capture, aren't they? Is there within HostAlert, is there a radius from the property that from your experience, that are affected? Let's say Taylor Swift, you know, again, that Taylor Swift, the pricing for the tickets alone was a challenge, and we managed to get tickets for my daughter, who's a big fan. And she, you know, so that was in Cardiff in the Millennium Stadium. We're in Neath, which is, you know, a 45-minute train ride away, so not particularly far. But I know, you know, there would have been people staying in Neath to kind of circumnavigate that expense. Is there a radius that you kind of generally work for events, or does that maybe just depend on what the event is?
Yeah, we kind of leave the radius down to the host. So we have a maximum radius of 25 miles around a property. So there are some really interesting cases. So, you know, we take Cardiff as the example, Taylor Swift Eras Tour. You know, you're going to have people that are in Cardiff that live there that don't have to worry about accommodation. But then you'll have people, as you're saying, from Neath, who again won't have a problem because you're a 45-minute, or even if it's a couple of hours, you don't mind doing a couple of hours drive. But then you've got the people that are trying to get tickets, and I live in Manchester, but Manchester's sold out. So I know I can go and see it in Cardiff. I can get a ticket in Cardiff, or I can get a ticket, you know, in London, and then you make a weekend of it. And so, you know, that's where the radius does come into play. So, you know, you're looking at events from a host perspective. You're looking at events that are within a sort of a 25-mile radius of your property. Most, you know, you look at London's 17 miles across, so you can capture pretty much every event in London. But if you have a property outside of a major, you know, urban area, you know, we use the example of Congleton, which is right in the middle of sort of Manchester and Liverpool, probably more nearer to Manchester, where there are some events that take place in that immediate vicinity. But, you know, you want to be, if you have an essay in that area that's outside of a city, you want to be able to capturing that space. So yeah, we allow up to 25 miles in terms of radius, so you're capturing those events. But people do travel, and we know that's one of the benefits of being an SA nowadays. You know, the travel market is changing in the UK specifically. You know, from 2024 to 2025, there was like 94 million guest nights in the UK alone. And yeah, a lot of those are going to be from people outside of the UK coming in. But then also there's a huge increase and that was a 10% increase year over year, just on booking nights across Airbnb, Booking.com, Expedia and Vrbo. But you've got a trend of people. Sometimes it's easier to have a long weekend in the UK than it is to have a long weekend in in Europe now. It's harder to travel. You've got the biometric scenario going on at the moment in Europe, which is causing problems. So we are going to see an increase in short-term stays within the UK. So it's important to be aware of what's going on and making sure you're maximizing it.
And so in terms of pricing, how much of the pricing is driven by events? Do you know what that stat is?
Yeah, it's around about, it depends on what the event is. So you can get, for example, using Taylor Swift, there was a 200% increase in pricing in the major UK cities. Typically, pricing is around about 60 to 80% with a major event. So, you're looking at that demand building over 3 stages. The early adopters they know when it's being announced, they book straight away to try and get into the curve. Then there's that middle piece, as I said earlier on. Then there's the 10 to 15, 20% at the end that sort of leave it to the last minute. And the price just goes up as you get closer towards the event, of course. But yeah, typically 60 to 80% is the increase. When you look at, say, use London, for example, the typical average daily rate in London is about £180. If you're getting a 60% increase on that, it's about £108 per night. If you've got a 3-day event, so you've got a concert at Wembley, you might come down on Friday, stay Saturday, stay Sunday, go home Monday. You're looking at £300 odd incremental revenue. And if you're doing that at the moment in London, I think roughly top of my head, there's about 3,500 events in the next 12 months in London. Now, not all of those are going to be impacting you, but a high majority of them are. So if you're getting one of those a month, that's where you got that £3,000 to £9,000 incremental revenue or lost revenue, depending on how you behave.
And as you say, the bigger the event, the bigger the increase in rate. Because the other one that jumps out to me being in South Wales was the Ryder Cup. So that was back in 2010 now. It was a long time ago now, but I remember at the time, that was a huge event, a once in a lifetime event effectively for Wales, for South Wales. It's unlikely we'll see another Ryder Cup anytime soon. It's, same as like the Commonwealth Games and those types of events in Birmingham, where you've got people coming from all over the world for this, one weekend effectively, or 1 week. People were giving up their houses and putting them on, renting their houses out for 10 grand for a week and things because they were nearby. It's because wealthy Americans will come in, they love the golf, that it's a high end market, and you can make a lot of money in a short space of time, can't you? But it's not that easy to spin up, is it? So to just get on Airbnb overnight, it doesn't kind of work like that. So the hosts that are already there are able to maximize that, and if you're well prepared and well set up for it, then it makes total sense how you can get the most out of it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I live in West Kirby on the Wirral, so I've got, Royal Liverpool Golf Club just down the road, and we have that same scenario. I think twice in the last 10 years, they've had the Open Golf at Royal Liverpool. The same thing happens. And people still get caught out. And it's the big events like that typically aren't the problem. So we've got the World Cup going on in North America, and some of the issues around an event like the World Cup is, you don't know which teams are going to be drawing in which area. So there's a problem there for hosts, but you can still plan ahead. You still know that there's a problem for guests, but you can still plan ahead as a host and know that the date is coming, and you can then start to shift and play. But it is those ones, and that's where HostAlert gets its name from. So when you do have a large event, so we've had Billy Idol cancelling and rescheduling events in Liverpool recently, and HostAlert customers will get a notification saying an event has been rescheduled or an event has been cancelled. So we're not only letting you know what's going on and what's coming up, but also then making it really easy for you to manage demand and manage your calendar ahead of time, so you don't get caught out.
And, in terms of larger hotels and operators, do they approach this differently at the moment to, your individual hosts and your smaller independent hosts? Do hotels have something like this in place already? Absolutely.
And actually, we're using the same data as the large hotel groups. We're kind of democratizing that aggregated data. So there isn't a single provider that we know of globally that takes the data from these 7 key categories. And we've been talking a lot about concerts and festivals and large events, but we're also giving people public holidays, access to school holidays in their area as well. I mean, I have a couple of kids. The only time I know when there's a holiday coming up, it's when I'm told by my wife or by the kids themselves. So having access to all of this information is crucial. And the large hotel chains have it already. Companies like Airbnb, companies like Expedia are already using the data set that we're using. And funny enough, Expedia, the data partner that we're working with, did a deal with Expedia recently. And in that one particular deal for Expedia, the fact that they were taking on this event intelligence layer into their operation increased their share price on the New York Stock Exchange by just under 9%. So it does have a huge effect on these companies. And when you're looking at a hotel and, they're on it, they have people in their revenue divisions, the same as airlines. This data is also used by Uber and Domino's Pizza. And we know that, in Domino's Pizza during, I can't remember what the last tournament was. I think could have been the European Championships in the UK. They were selling I think it was like 1 million pizzas an hour or something, so they were aware of the demand and what was coming down the line. And so we've taken this data that these very large companies take at a very aggregated view, and we've broken it down into the individual elements. So you can see, if you're only interested in concerts and festivals, you can just see concerts and festivals, and you can see them in a 5-mile radius around your property for the next 30 days, 90 days, 60 days, or the next year. So we allow you to really dig into what's important to you. If you are near a football ground, you kind of know the dates because the Premier League or whatever league it is announces them ahead. But then when you get into things like, say, Champions League or other tournaments, FA Cup, where you're going through rounds, every time that fixture is announced, it goes into HostAlert at the same time as the Hilton Hotel Group. You get it as well. So yeah, it is, democratizing that globally recognized and validated data down to the individual.
Awesome. That sounds really exciting. I think you're definitely onto something there. So if any of our listeners, who are interested in this, will be either operators in the SA space or will be thinking about getting into the SA space, what are the key things that they need to consider? Basically what we're trying to get at is, you mentioned it before, isn't it? How can you maximize revenue? Is there an ability to increase the minimum night stay potentially, which then adds even more revenue on top of that increased revenue? Is there anything else that people should consider to start doing things differently to get better returns?
Yeah, I think there are kind of 3 key mantras. So you're absolutely right. Maximize revenue around events, which is avoiding that underpricing those already open dates, optimizing those minimum night stays, really being aware of that early booking window and the changes that happen around events in your locality. But then there are a couple of other things. One is really understand the market growth. I talked about sort of the impact of short-term lets in the UK over 24 to 25 and that increase there. But you're looking at an increase in just revenue in the sector between now and 2033 of around about $14 billion of incremental revenue. So there is a change taking place at the moment. So there is a big opportunity to, for hosts to really maximize on the changing behaviors of consumers and the increase in sort of event staycations that are coming up. So, be aware of that market growth and what's happening. I know we talked earlier on about sort of, renters' rights bill. Many landlords are switching to short-term lets and realizing the income benefits there. It could be less stressful, guests in and out, quick and easy, turnaround, etc. The second one is then recognizing that importance of events in the short-term rental market. And we've talked a lot about that, but just really being aware of it. You go on the forums, you see people talking about it, and it is an issue and it is a problem. But, just understand what's coming up in the next, even like 3 to 6 months. What are the key events in your area that are taking place? It might not be a Taylor Swift, but it could be something like an Iron Man, or it could be something like a car show that takes place every year that you kind of forget about, but it's there and it does have an impact in your in your area. One of the things that we talk about constantly is the difference between having a property in the Lake District and having a property in London. Where London, there is as I said, 3,500 events over the next 12 months that are of high and medium impact that, are going to shift the market. In the Lake District, it's nowhere near that, but there's a high majority of short-term rental properties up there. But again, underserved in terms of the events that are taking place there. And we know that in Ambleside, in the next 6 months, there are 7 or 8 key events that are taking place that everyone should know about. So be aware of what's going on around your marketplace. And finally, don't be blind. Independent short-term rental hosts are, they don't have foresight. If you're a professional short-term rental host and you have 5 to 16 or 20 to 30 properties, and you're using sophisticated automated tooling, and you really understand how companies like and platforms like Price Labs work, you are getting 40% more revenue per booking than an independent, because you're aware of what's going on. But even the people on Price Labs can earn more because we can get them ahead of where they need to be. And finally, just look out for that market differentiator. What is going to make the difference between you and your competition? And it could be HostAlert.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons that I got out of the short-term rental market was because I got into property for passive income rather than I enjoy my job. I'm not trying to create another job for myself. And what I found was that keeping on top of all the events and like this was becoming a job, and managing, making sure my rates are updated and chopping and changing and things. And it became too much of a headache to try and track it all. So having something like this available to you is obviously a game changer. And there's so much tech and things out there now to make that job easier. But like you said, for anyone doing, the big thing for me is costs are going up, all different. There's tax increases all over the place, cost of living crisis and all, oil prices at the moment and everything. So there's 2 things at play. One, like you said, there will be an increase in vacations within the UK because the families are being squeezed, and the families that went on 3 holidays will now go on 2 and do another 1 or 2 weekends at home, or whatever. The ones that were going on 2, or, everyone's dropping an overseas holiday and because they're feeling the pinch, and they'll do more staycations. And on the other side of it, for hosts, their costs are going up, cleaning costs are going up, utility costs are going up. Therefore, there's a need to be able to increase the revenue. And so, if you really want to maximize, and this is the important bit for us, what we talk about is we want people to invest in property because we think it's a great investment. But how can you maximize your returns and get the majority, as much return from your property as you can? And that's sometimes just about being savvy, and it's what technology can you bring in to stay on top of event changes, in this example, price points, demand, to really make sure you can get the most out of it. And because the more you get out of it, the longer you'll be in the game and the more money you'll make in the long run, effectively. So, yeah. Awesome. Well, look, thanks very much for your time, Paul. Really appreciate it. Like I said, I think the biggest takeaway for me is just, it's not being serviced accommodation is not just about property. It's understanding the demand and then acting on it at the right time and really try and maximize those returns. So, this is a great example how the market is becoming more data driven and more professional. And again, even with the Renting Homes Act, that's about becoming more professional as a landlord. And the government is pushing that professionalization. We have actually our own software to help landlords manage their properties, which is pintech.io, we haven't spoken about, but that helps you manage your tenancies and all various things. And we know that having the right tools in place can have a significant difference on your life cycle as a landlord or as an investor or as a host. So yeah, absolutely. I think you're onto something there. I'm surprised it's taken 10 years for someone to pick this up, but yeah, well done on that. And look, really great having you on. Thanks very much, and look forward to speaking to you again soon. And good luck with the launch.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Gav. Really appreciate it. And HostAlert is available on the App Store, on Google Play Store. You can go to hostalert.co.uk to find out more about what we're doing. And obviously, we're across Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Instagram, HostAlert_. Yeah. And, if anyone has any questions, you can reach out to us on the website or through any of the social channels. And we'd love to talk to people and help them solve their problems. But really appreciate you giving us the opportunity to talk about what we think is a really exciting play for the independent STRs. And yeah, thank you very much, Gareth. I've really enjoyed talking to you today.
Thanks, Paul. We'll for the listeners, we'll put all of those in the show notes anyway, so that people get in touch with you. And yeah, we wish you all the best with the launch. Good luck with it.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. We hope you have learned something and have some tips to take away. We'd be very grateful if you enjoyed the show. You could give us a review and share with anyone that you know that may be interested. And of course, subscribe to the show so you can get notified when a new episode is released. If you'd like us to answer any questions or go deeper on a specific topic, please drop us a message at primeproperty.finance. See you on the next episode.